Guys, today YAE Miko guide. She's got new exciting themes and builds I want to talk to you about, and I also revisited the old ones while doing that. YAE is definitely one of those Genshin characters that only found her identity months after her release, and that happened with Dendro. Ever since then, she's pretty much never stopped getting better, and now with Furina and Xianyun, she got new teams. Specifically, the new YAE team I like the most is Plunge Hyperbloom. Rotations are pretty straightforward here: Furina's skill and burst, YAE elemental skills, and a normal attack to consistently apply electro to make Xianyun's whirl right after and follow it with her burst, then Nahida's skill and burst, and then YAE plunge, 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 plunge. The most interesting part of this team is that out of all the YAE teams I've tried and calculated, this is the one where YAE has the highest damage per rotation, so where she's contributing to the team damage the most. Even though the quicken uptime on this team is definitely less consistent than what she gets on the double electro aggravate teams due to the presence of the hydro application here, the damage she can generate through hyperblooms and plunges more than makes up for it. While YAE certainly doesn't have the highest plunge multipliers, the simple truth here is that the damage Xianyun is adding through her buffs is making them worthwhile. The obvious thing here is that since YAE doesn't have a battery like Facial here, using her burst every rotation is pretty much undoable. But honestly, personally, I don't think it's a big loss because I've always found her burst kind of clunky to use, and still you can use it every other rotation without building energy, so it's not the end of the world. Let me remind you that if you enjoy my content but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really helps me notice your support. The thing you're losing here compared to the aggravate teams is mainly Kazuha, a character that can group opponents and also deal serious AoE damage through aggravate procs, but at least in terms of pure damage, the plungers are also dealing some serious AoE damage themselves, so it doesn't feel that bad. A good alternative here will be to use Baiju and Facial instead of Xianyun and Nahida, so basically running a typical Quicken core but with Furina on top. While you're losing the plunge damage, you're gaining Quicken uptime thanks to Facial's electro application, so it still feels good. I wouldn't quite say this is straight up better compared to the aggravate YAE teams because it's more of a quite interesting variation that works very well actually, mostly because Furina is so strong, but it's pretty interesting. A definitive advantage the Nahida team has is that it has more room to grow through investment. So for example, Nahida's Constellation 2, Xianyun's Constellation 2, both are massive damage increases for the team that the other team can't quite replicate. Artifacts wise, it's a competition between Marashusei and Gilded Dreams, and for the most part they're rather equivalent. Also, Elemental Mastery is generally just better than attack here, both because of the Hyperblooms and because on Xianyun teams the plunge buffs she generates are not affected by the character's attack. Weapons wise, it depends, because on the Xianyun teams there is definitely less emphasis on the elemental skill damage YAE can deal compared to other YAE teams, so weapons like Kagura definitely lose value here. On the Baiju teams there are no plunges, but since she still benefits massively from Elemental Mastery to proc the Hyperblooms, weapons like Nahida's Signature still scale very well on this team. Moving on to more typical Quicken teams, this is definitely the team structure where YAE has solidified herself as one of the very good characters in the meta of Genshin. This is all quite classic at this point. You use YAE as an on-fielder, Facial as a sub DPS, and then a Dendro and an Anemo unit to complete the team. Rather than an Anemo unit, more of a flex slot unit, like characters like Junglik and Goder, but the Anemo character is definitely the one that fits the best, and the best pick is definitely Kazuha. And it's not only because of how greatly he can amplify the damage Facial and YAE can deal through the damage buffs he can provide for them, but it's also for his own damage. The main thing that makes Kazuha different here compared to other Anemo units is how often he can absorb other elements through the elemental skill and burst. Of course, on this team he absorbs a lot of electro, which allows him to consistently generate aggravate procs. The key part here is the AoE damage though, because since Facial and YAE are characters that for the most part are single target oriented, the fact that Kazuha can deal all of that damage in AoE really pushes the team to new heights. The Anemo part of things really generated a lot of controversy in the past, because many believed, and actually still believe, Sucrose to be better than Kazuha on these teams. The main reason is that in terms of buffing, she actually provides more than Kazuha here, thanks to the Elemental Mastery supportive effects she has, and also because of weapons like the Akushin Ring she can hold. And in single target situations like boss rooms for example, where Kazuha's AoE damage and grouping advantages aren't really factors, this becomes noticeable since Sucrose can evenly compete with him there. But I just value the AoE part of things more because it tackles the main weakness of the team. Next comes the Dendro character, and truthfully you have a lot of choices here. Usually if you use an offensive Anemo character like Sucrose or Kazuha, you kinda have to use a defensive Dendro character to complete the team. So for example, YAE, Kirara, Baiju, one of these three. Generally, Baiju and Kirara are the best choices because they also provide offensive buffs on top of healing or shielding the team, which is something YAE can't do. The team's damage is quite nice, but most importantly, it just plays amazingly. The fact that you don't have any restrictions in terms of on-fielding is just a blessing and makes the team feel very flexible in pretty much every scenario. Actually though, one thing that I feel like is very easy to forget about is using YAE's normal and charge attacks to proc more aggravates and visual attacks. They amount to a pretty sizable part of the team damage, so just remember to use them. Alternatively, if instead of Kazuha and Sucrose you use a defensive unit like a Zhongli or the new Xianyun, you can use Nahida. The Zhongli variant is not that great in my opinion, it's nice I guess, but in terms of offense, it's just considerably below the other options. The Xianyun variant is pretty interesting because in terms of total damage is not that far off from the Sucrose and Kazuha variants, but you're still losing the grouping compared to Kazuha, so that's noticeable. It becomes much more interesting if you have a Constellation 2 Nahida that is a variable the Kazuha and Sucrose variants can benefit from if you want to use a defensive options on those teams, so this definitely gives more merit to the Xianyun variant. Builds wise, it's Gilded Dreams all the way. It's just better than the Golden Troop, better than the attack and damage bonus set, so it's the best option. In terms of energy, her energy requirements are actually quite low on these teams thanks to the presence of Facial that is an excellent battery, and that's nice considering she has a 90 energy cost burst. It's pretty nice. Also, some people may not know this, but attack is a more important stat than Elemental Mastery on YAE here, so build that. Weapons wise, again, it depends. On the vast majority of teams, it's pretty regular, with the Kagura's Verity being by far the best option. Cheaper options include the Weight Set, a weapon I don't really like because it's just so random, or Purity, a completely free-to-play option that goes very well if you have a healer on the team. Lastly, YAE can be played as a sub DPS on teams, both on Dendro teams and other types of teams really. For Dendro teams, she can be paired with characters like Tignari or Alhaitham as an Electro player to enable Quicken. In these teams, her damage contribution is definitely at its lowest since she's mostly just dealing elemental skill damage, which for the role like a sub DPS is not bad, but it's not extremely exciting. At Constellation 0, I don't really like this role for YAE much because I don't feel like it takes advantage over strengths like the other teams I talked about can. For example, for Alhaitham, she's mostly a Constellation 6 visual side grade. It's nice if you don't have a Constellation 6 visual, in which case YAE can be better as a sub DPS, but in both cases it's a small difference. It's worth mentioning that Fischl and YAE can be used together in a double Electro sub DPS core, and they work very nicely in a lot of teams. Mainly the Dendro ones like with Tignari, but even less typical ones like the double G or Navia teams, they work very well because they do nice damage and they're very flexible. Their main strength is definitely that they don't rely on the active character to do any kind of specific action to deal damage, a lot of their attacks are just automatic, so it feels very consistent. Builds wise, for the artifacts, it's rather predictably the Golden Troop's triumph because most of her damage is coming from the elemental skill here, and she's off-field for the most part, so it's just straightforward. Stats-wise, just on Dendro teams, Elemental Mastery is more important than attack, both because it directly benefits her elemental skill damage through her passive, and because of the Quicken damage. If you don't use her on Dendro teams, then attack is better though. Energy requirements-wise, it's 0. Yeah, I don't really like to use the burst every rotation with YAE in sub DPS roles because it will just require a lot, a lot of energy recharge, and that's not really worth it. Weapons wise, Kagura is at its best here because it's the one that buffs elemental skill the most. It's her signature, so it's understandable, but you really shouldn't feel pressured to go for a strong weapon in this situation for YAE because her base damage is really not the highest in this role. Basically, for a Constellation 0 sub DPS YAE, the difference between Kagura and a free-to-play option is barely noticeable. And I'm done for today. Talking about weapons, I recently made this video where I analyzed how 5-star weapons are in reality mostly weaker than you think, so it's interesting, go check that. And peace!